Thank you for being here tonight. Find a quiet place, settle in, and let this story unfold slowly. If you enjoy emotional science fiction stories about humanity, sacrifice, and quiet courage, consider liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. Tonight's story begins on a dying world, where an alien queen arrived to punish a starving village. But instead of rebellion, she found a human engineer giving away his own food to keep strangers alive. Murren Hollow sat on the western edge of Averon, a dry farming world more than 600 light-years from Earth. Years ago, the village had been known for grain fields that stretched farther than the eye could see. Wind barriers lined the roads. Water pumps hummed day and night beneath the soil. Children used to run between green rows while cargo crawlers carried harvests toward the trade cities. Now the fields were dead. The ground had split open under months of heat. Dust covered the irrigation lines. The main well in the village square only coughed up thin brown water every few hours. People still gathered around it anyway. Hope was hard to kill. Marcus Hale stood knee-deep inside the broken pump station just outside the village. One arm disappeared into a rusted pressure housing while dirty water dripped slowly onto his sleeves. The human engineer looked exhausted. His hand shook slightly as he tightened another damaged seal. He waited until the shaking passed before pulling his arm back out. No one needed to see that part. Marcus had arrived 7 months earlier with a relief repair crew sent from Earth after a border conflict damaged the regional water systems. The crew left once the funding ended. Marcus stayed. At first, the villagers thought he was insane. No outsider stayed in a starving settlement after payments stopped. But Marcus kept repairing pipes, rebuilding filters, and crawling into broken machinery long after everyone else had given up. Because without the pump, Murren Hollow would die. A shadow crossed the station entrance. Sarah Vian stood there holding a small data slate against her chest. The pressure dropped again, she said quietly. Marcus nodded without looking up. I know. Sarah stepped closer. She was the village seedkeeper, young but already carrying the tired eyes of someone forced to think about next year while everyone else worried about tomorrow morning. You haven't slept, she said. Marcus finally looked at her. Neither have you. That isn't an answer. The pump doesn't care. Sarah crossed her arms. You said that yesterday. And the pump still doesn't care today. For a moment she almost smiled. Almost. Then the distant sound of engines rolled across the desert. Both of them froze. Marcus slowly climbed out from beneath the machinery. At the top of the ridge beyond the village, black transport crawlers appeared through the dust. Tax caravan. Sarah's face lost color immediately. No, she whispered. Marcus already knew. The silver banner at the front confirmed it. Provincial Throne Authority. And standing atop the lead crawler, Queen Regent Viola Thorne herself. The villagers noticed seconds later. People began stepping out from homes and storage sheds. Workers abandoned tools. Mothers pulled children closer. Fear spread faster than sound. Marcus wiped his hands on his stained shirt and stared toward the approaching convoy. Why would she come personally? Sarah asked. Marcus gave the only honest answer. Because someone wants to make an example out of this place. The caravan rolled into Murren Hollow beneath clouds of red dust. Armed guards stepped down first. Then officials. Then the Queen Regent herself. Viola Thorne was taller than Marcus expected. Her slate blue skin carried the sharp features common among Western Averan nobility. Dark ridges swept back from her brow like a crown carved directly into bone. Everything about her looked controlled. Measured. Dangerous. Not cruel. Cruel people usually enjoyed power too openly. Viola looked like someone who had learned how to survive inside it. Beside her walked District Tax Officer Rovan Cast. Marcus recognized him immediately. Smooth voice. Clean uniform. Careful smile. The kind of man who never sounded angry because men like him never needed to raise their voices. Behind them came clerks, guards, and 2 empty supply wagons. Marcus stared at the empty wagons longer than anything else. Sarah noticed. They came to take the seed, she whispered. Marcus didn't answer. Because she was right. The square fell silent as Viola stepped toward the dry well. She studied everything carefully. The cracked stone. The empty buckets. The starving faces. the children trying not to stare at armed guards. Rovan opened a data slate. Murren Hollow has missed 3 seasonal grain payments, he announced loudly. Provincial records show normal production levels despite repeated debt notices. A murmur spread through the crowd. Marcus saw Tavern Row near the front clench both fists hard enough to shake. Young. Hungry. Angry enough to do something stupid. Rovan continued speaking. Under provincial law, unpaid grain debts may be recovered through emergency seizure of local food reserves, labor reassignment, and agricultural property confiscation. The word confiscation hit the village like a physical blow. Sarah stepped forward immediately. You cannot take the seed stores. Rovan looked at her calmly. If debt remains unpaid by sunset, we can. The fields are dead. The reports disagree. The reports are lies. Several guards shifted their hands toward their weapons. Marcus moved before anyone else could. He stepped beside Sarah, not in front of her. That mattered. You should lower your voice, Marcus said quietly. Sarah turned toward him in disbelief. They're taking next year away from us. I know. Then say something. Marcus looked toward the guards. Then toward the frightened villagers. Then toward Tavern, who looked one bad sentence away from charging someone. Not yet, Marcus said softly. Sarah stared at him with frustration burning in her eyes. But she stepped back. Viola noticed everything. The anger. The fear. And especially the human calming the crowd instead of provoking it. That did not match the reports she had read. According to official records, Marcus Hale was supposed to be dangerous. An outsider distributing unauthorized supplies. A foreign influence encouraging resistance against lawful collection orders. But the man standing in front of her looked more tired than rebellious. Viola spoke for the first time. Who speaks for Murren Hollow? The village went completely still. Then several faces turned toward Marcus. He hated that immediately. Because Rovan had been waiting for exactly this moment. One human standing between the throne and a starving alien village was the perfect story for someone trying to blame an outsider. Marcus stepped backward instead. He motioned toward Elder Ida Rowe standing near the well. Ida speaks for Murren Hollow, Marcus said. I only repair machinery. Rovan smiled faintly. A humble answer. Marcus ignored him. Ida slowly stepped forward. Age had bent her body, but not her voice. My Queen Regent, she said carefully. Our fields failed after the pump system broke. We have no grain left to surrender. Rovan tapped his slate. Provincial records show stable water flow. Our water died months ago. The maintenance reports say the system remained operational. Marcus stayed silent. Viola noticed that too. Finally, she looked directly at him. You disagree with the reports. Marcus met her eyes. I disagree with the pump. A few villagers almost laughed despite themselves. Rovan didn't. The human has interfered repeatedly with official oversight, he said quickly. He distributes unauthorized aid and encourages dependency. Marcus folded his arms. I repaired water filters. You distributed food. Marcus said nothing. That silence told Viola more than a denial would have. Interesting. Very interesting. Rovan turned toward the guards. The seed stores should be inspected immediately. Fear moved visibly through the crowd. Sarah stepped directly in front of the seed house entrance. No. Rovan's expression sharpened. Refusing inspection suggests concealment. It suggests survival. Marcus watched Viola carefully. A ruler's face revealed things before their voice did. And right now, for the first time since arriving, the Queen Regent looked uncertain. The square stayed silent. Dust moved slowly through the evening air while Queen Regent Viola Thorne studied the young seedkeeper standing in front of the storage house. Sarah Vin did not move aside. Behind her stood the future of Murren Hollow. Not food. Not wealth. Hope. If the seed stores were taken, the village would survive a few more weeks at most. After that, there would be nothing left to plant. Nothing left to rebuild. Rovan stepped forward with practiced patience. Open the building voluntarily, he said, and the inspection will proceed peacefully. Sarah's jaw tightened. You speak like this place still has choices. The throne always gives choices. Marcus finally spoke. No, he said quietly. It gives consequences. Several guards looked toward him instantly. Rovan smiled without warmth. You see, my queen? Always careful. Always persuasive. Marcus ignored him completely. Instead, he looked at Sarah. Open it. Her head snapped toward him. What? Open the seed house. They'll take everything. Not if we make them look at it first. Sarah stared at him for several long seconds. Then slowly, painfully, she reached into her pocket and removed the key. Viola noticed her hand shaking. Not from fear. From exhaustion. The thick stone door opened with a low grinding sound. Cool air drifted out into the square. Viola entered first. Rovan followed beside her while Elon Moore, the royal clerk, activated a recording slate. Marcus stepped inside last. The seed house was small but organized with almost painful care. Rows of cloth sacks rested on raised shelves above the cold stone floor. Every bag carried handwritten tags listing crop type, water needs, soil condition, and expected planting cycles. Nothing about the room looked hidden. Nothing looked stolen. It looked protected. Viola moved slowly between the shelves. Some sacks were nearly empty. Others held only enough seed for a single field. Sarah watched the queen carefully. We counted every grain, she said quietly. Rovan tapped one of the sacks. Unreported agricultural reserves. Future harvest reserves, Sarah corrected. Debt assets. They are not food. Rovan looked toward Viola. Provincial law allows emergency seizure of all undeclared grain products during debt recovery. Marcus spoke from behind them. Seed is not grain. Rovan turned immediately. It grows into grain. Yes, Marcus said. That's the important part. Viola stopped beside one of the tag shelves. Two different handwriting styles covered the label. Sarah's sharp angular notes, and smaller notes written beneath them. Marcus. Moisture timing. Soil repair estimates. Water pressure calculations. You worked on these records together? Viola asked. Sarah answered first. He understands the pump. Marcus added quietly, she understands how to keep people alive after it works again. Rovan folded his hands behind his back. A touching partnership. Marcus looked tired already. Not everything is manipulation. Rovan's smile thinned. No. Sometimes it is preparation. Viola kept walking through the room. She had inspected villages before. Real smugglers hid food badly because greed always became careless eventually. But this place did not feel greedy. It felt desperate. One sack held barely enough seed for half a field. Another had been divided into tiny measured portions with exact planting notes beside each amount. Nothing here suggested theft. Everything suggested survival. Viola turned toward Sarah. If the village is starving, why protect seed no one can eat? Sarah answered immediately. Because hungry people still need a future. The room became very quiet after that. Even Rovan stopped talking for a moment. Viola looked toward Marcus again. The human stood near the back wall with one hand resting against the stone as if he needed the support more than he wanted anyone to notice. Interesting. Very interesting. Rovan recovered first. My queen, emotional reasoning changes nothing. Debt law remains clear. Marcus finally looked directly at him. Then maybe the law stopped looking at people. Rovan laughed softly. And now the human lectures governments. No, Marcus said. I repair pumps. The government part is your failure. The guards stiffened instantly. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Elon Moore stopped writing for half a second. But Viola looked thoughtful. Not angry. Thoughtful. That worried Rovan more. The Queen Regent moved toward the final shelf near the back wall. One tag caught her attention immediately. Emergency reserve. Do not consume unless total crop failure confirmed. Below it, another line had been added later in Marcus' handwriting. If consumed early, village survival probability falls below recovery threshold. Viola read it twice. You calculated survival percentages. Marcus nodded once. The pump failed faster than expected. Sarah looked away. Viola noticed that too. How many times, she asked carefully, did the village discuss opening these reserves? Sarah answered before Marcus could stop her. 3. And the children were hungry. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Sarah kept going. I said we should eat some of the reserve. He said no. Viola looked toward Marcus. You denied food to starving people. Marcus met her gaze calmly. I denied a slower death. The sentence landed hard inside the quiet room. Rovan immediately stepped forward. You admit control over local supply decisions. I gave advice. You influenced survival policy. Marcus sounded exhausted now. People keep trying to make caring sound illegal. Rovan ignored that. To refuse emergency consumption authority without government approval. The government wasn't here, Sarah snapped suddenly. Everyone looked at her. Months of fear finally cracked open inside her voice. You weren't here when the water failed. You weren't here when children fainted in the fields. You weren't here when we boiled empty pots so they could sleep thinking food was coming. The guards shifted again. Marcus moved instantly. Not toward the guards. Toward Sarah. Sarah. She looked at him with tears burning in her eyes. They came to take the seed. I know. And you still want calm? Yes. How? Marcus answered softly. Because panic feeds people for one night. We need something that feeds them next season too. Sarah looked away before she broke completely. Viola watched the exchange carefully. This did not feel staged. Nothing here felt organized against the throne. If anything, the human kept preventing rebellion every time emotions rose too high. Rovan noticed her silence and pushed harder. My queen, influence like this is exactly how dependency spreads. They obey him over lawful authority. Marcus gave a tired laugh. They obey me because I tell them things they don't want to hear. That answer stayed with Viola longer than she expected. Because it felt true. Outside, wind scraped dust across the village square. Inside the seat house, the Queen Regent slowly looked over the shelves one final time. Then she turned toward Marcus. You disagree with the official reports? Yes. You believe the village debt is false? Yes. You believe someone manipulated the records? Yes. Rovan stepped forward instantly. Accusations without proof. Marcus looked at him calmly. No. Proof without permission. That changed the room. Viola's eyes narrowed slightly. What proof? Marcus glanced toward Sarah. Then toward the pump station outside the village. The water system. Rovan answered too quickly. The system already failed inspection months ago. Marcus shook his head. No. The inspection failed the system. Silence. Complete silence. Even Elon slowly lowered his stylus. Viola studied Marcus carefully now. The human was pale. Sweat lined his forehead despite the cooling evening air. And every few seconds his fingers trembled slightly before he forced them still again. You are hiding something, Viola said. Marcus nodded once. Yes. Rovan smiled immediately. There. Marcus continued. I'm hiding it because if I showed it too early, no one would survive long enough to matter. The words confused almost everyone except Viola. Because suddenly, she understood something important. Marcus was not afraid for himself. He was afraid for the village. That changed everything. Rovan sensed control slipping and immediately pressed harder. My queen, sunset approaches. Under provincial law, the seizure order activates automatically unless debt is resolved. Sarah's face went white. Outside, villagers had gathered silently around the seed house doors waiting for a decision that would decide whether Murren Hollow survived the winter. Viola looked toward Marcus one last time. Show me the pump. Rovan turned sharply. My queen, this delay serves no purpose. Neither does blindness, Viola answered. And for the first time that day, Rovan looked nervous. The walk to the pump station felt heavier than the desert heat. Nobody stayed behind. Villagers followed silently through the dying fields while armed guards surrounded the Queen Regent. Dust moved around their feet in slow waves as the sun lowered toward the horizon. Marcus walked near the front beside Sarah. Or at least he tried to. Twice Viola noticed him steady himself against broken fence posts when he thought nobody was watching. His face looked worse now. Too pale. Too tired. But he kept moving anyway. Rovan stayed close to Viola during the walk. "My queen," he said carefully, "the human has controlled access to the pump system for months. Anything discovered there could easily be fabricated." Marcus gave a weak laugh. That accusation came fast. "You admit opportunity." "I admit I had to keep your failure alive with scrap metal and luck." Rovan's expression hardened. Viola remained silent. Ahead of them, the pump station sat half buried in dust at the edge of the dead fields. The building looked exhausted. Old storm damage scarred the metal walls. Emergency patches covered half the outer pipes. One intake valve had been repaired with mismatched bolts and sealing strips clearly taken from unrelated machinery. Ugly repairs. But careful ones. Marcus stopped near the entrance. Sarah unlocked the outer hatch while Tavern helped pull the warp door open. Inside, stale heat rolled outward. The station smelled like rust, burned wiring, and recycled water. Marcus pointed weakly toward the inner chamber. "Main pressure housing is inside." Rovan crossed his arms. "And conveniently under the human's control." Marcus looked too tired to even be annoyed anymore. "No," he said quietly. "Under gravity's control. I've been negotiating with it for 7 months." A few villagers smiled despite themselves. Even Viola almost did. Almost. The inner chamber opened with a metallic groan. Inside sat the heart of Murren Hollow's water system. Or what remained of it. Pipes twisted across the walls like exposed veins. Pressure gauges flickered weakly. Several regulator panels had been removed entirely, leaving empty spaces inside the machine. Elon Moore stepped closer immediately. "Wait," he said. He leaned toward one of the open brackets. "There's a missing flow regulator." Rovan answered instantly. "Emergency wartime redistribution." Marcus spoke from the doorway. "There was never a replacement." Viola looked toward Elon. "Can you confirm that?" Elon removed a small inspection lens from his coat and knelt beside the machinery. Dust coated the inner housing, but beneath it old seal markings still remained. He wiped one section clean. Then froze. The silence changed immediately. Viola noticed. "What is it?" Elon looked uncomfortable now. "The removal seal belongs to the district tax authority." Every villager went still. Rovan answered quickly. "All district equipment transfers use regional seals." Elon kept staring at the bracket. "Yes," he said slowly. "But this serial code also appears in a civilian sales registry." Rovan's face changed. Only slightly. But Viola saw it. "When?" she asked. Elon swallowed once. 3 weeks after removal. The crowd erupted instantly. "You sold it. You stole our water. Murderer." Guards grabbed weapons as villagers surged forward in fury. Tavern nearly reached Rovan before Marcus stepped between them. "Stop!" The shout shocked everyone silent. Marcus caught Tavern by both shoulders. "Not like this. He killed the fields." "I know." "He killed people." "I know." Tavern shook with rage. Marcus' voice dropped lower. "If you touch him now, they stop listening to the truth and start listening to fear." Tavern stared at him, breathing hard. Then slowly stepped back. Viola watched the entire exchange carefully. Again the human stopped violence instead of encouraging it. Rovan pointed immediately. "You see, they obey him before lawful authority." Marcus looked exhausted. "No," he said softly. "They obey me because someone has to keep them from breaking." The words hit harder than shouting would have. Viola turned toward the exposed machinery again. "You sold the regulator," she said coldly. Rovan straightened his posture. The border conflict required emergency resource transfers. "You sold village survival equipment." "I redirected under wartime authority." Sarah stepped forward with fury burning in her face. We sent repair requests for months. Rovan ignored her. The village had already fallen below profitable output. Because the water died. Because weak settlements fail during difficult seasons. Marcus laughed once. It sounded more like pain than humor. Rovan turned sharply. You find this amusing? Marcus leaned against the wall for support. No, he said quietly. Just familiar. Viola looked at him. What does that mean? Marcus stared directly at Rovan. Where I come from, people who steal from the poor usually call the poor lazy afterward. Nobody spoke. Not even the guards. Dr. Lisa Wren, who had remained mostly silent until now, stepped closer to Marcus. You should sit down. I'm fine. You are visibly shaking. The pump needed pressure balancing. That isn't what I asked. Marcus looked away instead of answering. Viola noticed that too. Everything about him suddenly looked wrong to her now. The pale skin. The trembling hands. The way he kept conserving movement were never possible. Dr. Lisa noticed it too. How much has he been eating? She asked suddenly. Nobody answered. Lisa looked around sharply. How much? Elder Ida spoke quietly from the crowd. We thought humans required less food. Lisa's expression changed immediately. No, she said flatly. Not like this. Sarah frowned. Then suddenly grabbed Marcus' worn tool satchel from beside the wall. Marcus reacted instantly. Sarah, don't. Too late. She had already opened it. Inside were repair notes, pressure diagrams, water schedules, and a small folded ration ledger. Sarah stared down at it in confusion. What is this? Marcus took one weak step forward. Leave it alone. But Sarah was already opening the pages. Her face slowly changed. Then changed again. Names filled every page. Nomi. Tavin's younger brother. Ida. Laura. Well workers. Children with fever. Pregnant mothers. Old laborers. Beside every name were food amounts written carefully in Marcus' small handwriting. Half ration. Quarter portion. Soup mix. Protein strip. Salt tablets. Emergency broth. Date after date after date. At the bottom of nearly every page, one sentence repeated again and again. My portion can wait. The room went silent. Nomi pushed closer through the crowd to see the pages. The packet's near our door, she whispered. Sarah looked up slowly. You gave away your rations. Marcus closed his eyes. Rovan recovered first. An authorized ration distribution, he announced immediately. A direct violation of. Be quiet. Everyone turned. Viola's voice had become ice. Real ice. Not royal calm. Not controlled patience. Cold anger. Rovan actually stepped backward. Elon carefully took the ledger from Sarah's hands. He compared the written entries against the official ration records on his slate. Then looked up slowly. The missing supply reports, he said quietly. Viola's eyes narrowed. What about them? Elon swallowed once. The shortages blamed on village theft. He looked toward Marcus. They match his personal ration distributions almost exactly. The realization spread through the room piece by piece. Marcus had not stolen food. He had signed for full engineering rations legally assigned to him, then quietly broken them apart to keep villages alive. And when shortages appeared in official records, Rovan blamed the starving village instead. Marcus never defended himself, because defending himself would expose the families receiving food. Sarah looked like she had been struck. You idiot, she whispered. Marcus gave a weak shrug. Seemed simpler. Tears filled her eyes instantly. You were starving too. Marcus looked away. There were children. Dr. Lisa knelt beside him now, checking his pulse directly. Her expression darkened immediately. How long has he been working like this? Tavin answered quietly. Every day. Sarah added softly, every night too. Lisa looked furious. At this level of malnutrition he should barely be standing. Marcus attempted another weak smile. The pump disagreed. Then his knees suddenly gave out. Sarah caught him first. The entire room lurched forward at once. Dr. Lisa pushed through immediately. Move. Marcus hit the floor hard beside the damaged pump housing. His breathing turned shallow. Too fast. Too weak. Lisa checked his pulse again and swore under her breath. Water, she snapped. Nobody moved. The horrible irony hit everyone at the same time. A starving village with a dead pump had almost no water left to give. Viola turned instantly toward the guards. From the caravan supplies. Now. The guards ran. Marcus tried to push himself up anyway. The seed house, he whispered. Sarah grabbed his shoulder. It's safe. You protect the seed first. I said it's safe. Marcus still looked unconvinced. Even barely conscious. He was still worrying about the village before himself. Viola stared down at him silently. Everything she believed when she arrived at Murren Hollow was collapsing piece by piece. The dangerous outsider. The manipulator. The rebellious foreigner. Instead she found a starving engineer who repaired broken pumps all night, then secretly gave away his own food during the day, and somehow still refused to let the villagers turn violent even after learning who destroyed their water. Viola remembered his earlier words. A report can lie. A table cannot. Now she finally understood what he meant. Because Marcus Hale himself had become the table. And the truth written across him was impossible to ignore. Marcus woke to the sound of arguing. Voices. Distant at first. Then sharper. Then painfully clear. The seizure order still stands until sunset confirmation. That order was built on false records. False records require court review. And starving villagers require water. Marcus forced his eyes open slowly. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar stone. One of the village homes. A lantern burned nearby, casting weak orange light across the room. His entire body hurt. Every muscle felt hollow. Dr. Lisa Wren noticed immediately. Stay down. Marcus tried sitting up anyway. The seed house. Still there. The villagers. Alive. Marcus relaxed slightly at that. Only slightly. Sarah sat beside the doorway with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her eyes looked red from exhaustion. Or crying. Possibly both. You nearly died, she said quietly. Marcus looked away. The pump was worse. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. I genuinely do not know how to speak to you anymore. That makes two of us. Before Sarah could answer, the door opened. Queen Regent Viola entered alone. No guards. No armor. No royal display. Just silence. Marcus immediately tried to stand. Viola stopped him with one raised hand. If you fall over again, Dr. Wren may actually kill someone this time. Lisa nodded once. Correct. Marcus stayed seated. Viola studied him carefully for several seconds. Without the armor and formal posture, she looked different now. Less untouchable. More tired. Like someone carrying something heavy for a very long time. Finally she spoke. The seizure order has been suspended. Sarah closed her eyes in relief. Marcus only asked one question. The seed. Protected. He nodded once. Nothing else. No celebration. No victory. Viola noticed. You already knew the evidence would stop Rovan. Marcus shook his head weakly. No. Sarah looked confused. Then why risk all this? Marcus looked toward the small window where darkness covered the fields outside. Because eventually the truth becomes too heavy to carry quietly. The room fell silent again. Viola stepped closer. Elon Moore reviewed the district files after your collapse. Marcus said nothing. The false yield reports go back almost 2 years. Sarah's face hardened. 2 years. Viola nodded slowly. Water equipment from failing settlements was removed, sold privately, then the resulting crop losses were blamed on village incompetence. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. How many villages? Viola hesitated. That hesitation answered the question by itself. Sarah looked horrified. There are others. Yes, Viola admitted quietly. The room suddenly felt colder. Marcus leaned back against the wall. Then Murren Hollow wasn't the first. No. And probably not the worst. Viola didn't answer. Because again, silence answered for her. Outside, voices continued moving through the village square. News travelled quickly. The Queen Regent had arrested a district tax officer. A starving village had survived seizure. A human engineer had collapsed after giving away his own food. People would talk about it across the western provinces by morning. Marcus already hated that. Viola noticed immediately. You dislike attention. It usually makes problems worse. You saved this village. Marcus looked toward Sarah. No, he said quietly. They saved themselves. I just kept the pump breathing long enough for someone important to finally look at it. Sarah shook her head. You always do that. Do what? Act like destroying yourself for people is normal. Marcus looked uncomfortable now. That seems dramatic. Lisa actually laughed once. You collapsed from starvation beside industrial machinery. Marcus thought about it briefly. Fair. For the first time all day, Sarah almost smiled again. Then a knock came from outside. Elon Moore entered carrying several data slates against his chest. His expression looked deeply unsettled. My Queen Regent, he said carefully. Additional records arrived from district storage. Viola straightened immediately. What kind of records? Relief shipments. Marcus looked up sharply. Elon swallowed. Emergency food shipments assigned to drought settlements across the Western Rim. Sarah frowned. What about them? Elon looked sick now. Most never arrived. The room went silent. Marcus slowly sat forward despite Lisa's glare. How many? We don't know yet. But enough. Yes. Viola took one of the slates and scanned the files quickly. Her face hardened more with every line. Rovan redirected relief cargo too, she said coldly. Sarah whispered, people died. No one disagreed. Marcus leaned both elbows against his knees. Suddenly he looked less tired. And more angry. Not loud anger. Not explosive anger. The dangerous kind. Quiet anger. The kind that sits still. Viola noticed immediately. What are you thinking? Marcus answered honestly. I'm thinking hunger makes people blame themselves first. Sarah looked toward him. What? Marcus stared at the floor. When systems fail people long enough, eventually they stop asking who broke the system. The words stayed in the room like smoke. Farmers think they failed the fields. He looked toward Sarah. Mothers think they failed their children. Then toward Viola. Villagers think they deserve to starve. No one spoke after that, because every person in the room knew he was right. Viola finally lowered the slate slowly. For years I trusted the reports. Marcus looked at her calmly. Most rulers trust distance. And you think that was weakness? No, Marcus said quietly. I think it was comfortable. That should have sounded insulting. Instead, it sounded honest. Viola walked toward the window and looked outside. Lanterns glowed softly across Murren Hollow now. Villagers moved between homes carrying bowls of relief food from the open caravan supplies. For the first time in months, people were eating without fear of tomorrow morning. And somehow that felt heavier than any battlefield victory she had ever witnessed. You changed the law today, Elon said carefully behind her. Viola nodded once. The first burden rule. Sarah looked confused. What does that mean exactly? Viola turned back toward the room. It means no famine seizure order can be enforced without direct inspection. Marcus stayed silent. Viola continued. Officials must walk the villages themselves. See the homes. Check the wells. Inspect the pumps. Look people in the eyes before deciding what they owe. Sarah stared at her. That's actually happening. Yes. Marcus finally spoke again. Rovan won't be the only one. Viola met his gaze. No. Others will fight this. Yes. You'll make enemies. A strange expression crossed Viola's face then. Something tired. Something honest. I think, she said quietly, I already had them. The room fell silent once more. Then suddenly a small figure appeared hesitantly near the doorway. Nomi. She held a tiny clay bowl carefully with both hands. Steam rose from it. Marcus immediately noticed. No. Nomi ignored him and walked forward anyway. You didn't eat earlier. I'm fine. Everyone in the room answered at once. No, you're not. Marcus looked betrayed. Even Viola almost smiled this time. Almost. Nomi carefully held the bowl toward him. This one is yours. Marcus stared at it for several long seconds. Simple broth. Small pieces of root vegetable. Protein grains. Not much. But in Murren Hollow. It was precious. He looked toward Sarah. Then toward Ida standing quietly outside the doorway. Then toward the villagers passing food between homes in the darkness. Finally Marcus sighed softly and accepted the bowl. The room seemed to relax all at once. Like everyone had been holding their breath waiting for that moment. Marcus noticed immediately. You're all being very strange about soup. Sarah folded her arms. You almost starved to death while pretending not to notice. That feels slightly exaggerated. Lisa pointed directly at him. You collapsed. Marcus considered that. Again, fair. Nomi smiled for the first time in weeks. And somehow, that small smile changed the entire room more than speeches ever could. Outside, Murren Hollow was still poor. Still damaged. Still uncertain about the future. But the seed house remained full. The water system would be repaired. And for the first time in a very long while, hope no longer felt illegal. Dawn came slowly to Murren Hollow. For the first time in months, smoke rose from cooking fires across the village before sunrise. The smell of real food drifted through the streets while exhausted families stepped outside carrying bowls instead of empty buckets. It was not a feast. But nobody in Murren Hollow expected miracles anymore. Survival itself already felt unbelievable. Marcus stood near the repaired irrigation trench with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Dr. Lisa had forced him into it personally. Twice. And Nomi had apparently been assigned as additional security. If you remove the blanket, she warned seriously, Sarah said I should tell on you. Marcus looked genuinely offended. This village has become extremely aggressive lately. Nomi smiled proudly. That means you're getting better. Nearby, repair crews from the Provincial Water Corps worked around the damaged pump station. Fresh regulators rested beside crates of tools while engineers inspected the ruined system Marcus had kept alive for 7 impossible months. One of the engineers looked down at Marcus' repairs in disbelief. You held pressure with this. Marcus sipped carefully from a cup of broth. Mostly. That seal should not even function. It complained constantly. The engineer stared harder. You rebuilt half the intake system from scrap. Marcus shrugged weakly. The original parts were busy being sold illegally. Several workers nearby tried not to laugh. Even now, Roven's arrest still felt unreal. The former district tax officer sat chained inside one of the transport crawlers near the square while armed guards watched him day and night. No one in Murren Hollow approached him. No threats. No shouting. Nothing. That silence disturbed Roven far more than anger would have. Viola stood near the village while reviewing reports with Elon Moore when Sarah approached carrying the seed ledger tightly against her chest. The western field can still recover, Sarah said carefully, if water flow stabilizes. Elon adjusted his slate. The new repair crews estimate partial irrigation within 3 days. Sarah blinked in disbelief. 3 days. For full pressure, Marcus called from nearby, probably closer to 6. One of the engineers immediately pointed toward him. Thank you. Marcus nodded. You're welcome. Viola noticed something strange then. The villagers trusted Marcus completely, but not in the way Roven had described. Not like a leader. Not like a revolutionary. They trusted him the way drowning people trust the first solid thing they find in deep water. Quietly. Completely. Without needing speeches. Viola walked toward him slowly. You should still be resting. Marcus looked toward the repair crews. They're installing the secondary regulators backward. 3 engineers stopped working instantly. One checked the panel. He's right. Viola stared at Marcus. You identified that from here. The vibration sounded wrong. Sarah sighed softly. He does this constantly. Marcus looked mildly embarrassed. The pump is loud. The pump is 50 meters away. It carries sound well. Viola shook her head slowly. Then her expression turned serious again. News already left the province. Marcus immediately looked unhappy. That sounds dangerous. It probably is. Elon stepped forward holding another report slate. Several settlements are requesting independent inspections under the first burden rule. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. There it is. Sarah frowned. What? The backlash. Viola studied him carefully. You expected resistance. You changed a system that protected powerful people. Marcus looked toward the distant horizon. They never surrender quietly. Elon nodded reluctantly. Some officials are already arguing that your decision weakened provincial authority. Viola crossed her arms. And what do you think? Elon hesitated. Then answered honestly. I think authority that fears honesty was already weak. For the first time since arriving in Murren Hollow, Viola smiled. A real one. Small, but real. Marcus noticed it immediately. That expression probably scares politicians. It should. The morning passed slowly. Water crews worked. Villagers repaired damaged irrigation lines. Children followed supply wagons like curious shadows. And for the first time in a very long while, nobody in Murren Hollow looked afraid of sunset. By afternoon, the repaired pump coughed violently once. Then again. Then suddenly a stream of brown water burst into the main irrigation trench. The entire village froze. No cheering came. Nobody moved at first. People simply stared. Like they were afraid hope would disappear if they breathed too loudly near it. The water flowed slowly through cracked channels toward the dead fields. Sarah covered her mouth with both hands. Ida sat down on the edge of the well because her legs suddenly stopped working. Tavern laughed once. Then immediately started crying instead. Marcus watched the water quietly beside Viola. It'll clear after the sediment flushes out, he said softly. Viola looked toward him. You really stayed here alone for 7 months. Marcus shrugged beneath the blanket. The pump kept breaking. That is not a normal answer. No, Sarah said from nearby. It really isn't. For a while nobody spoke. The sound of moving water filled the silence instead. Finally Viola turned toward Marcus fully. When I first arrived, she admitted quietly, I thought you were dangerous. Marcus nodded once. That was reasonable. You were never angry at me. Marcus looked toward the fields. You hadn't seen the truth yet. And if I ignored it, then I would have tried something else. Viola studied him carefully. You still trusted me enough to try. Marcus shook his head. No. That surprised her. I trusted the truth to become too heavy to ignore forever. The sentence stayed with Viola long after he spoke it. Far beyond Murren Hollow, officials across the western provinces would soon read new laws forcing direct inspections before famine seizures. They would complain, argue, resist. But now the burden had changed. Now rulers would have to look directly at the suffering hidden inside their reports. And somewhere deep down, Viola knew Marcus Hale had changed more than policy. He had changed the distance between power and pain. 2 days later, the Queen Regent prepared to leave Murren Hollow. Her caravan stood ready near the square while repaired supply wagons loaded fresh water filters, emergency food stores, and replacement pump components for nearby settlements. This time, the wagons were arriving full instead of leaving empty. Rovan was brought out in chains under heavy guard. He looked smaller now. Not weaker. Smaller. As if exposure had stripped away something invisible that power once protected. The villagers watched silently while he was loaded into the crawler. No one celebrated. Justice arriving late rarely feels victorious. Before leaving, Viola approached Marcus one final time. He still looked pale, though much steadier now. Sarah stood beside him holding the repaired seed ledger beneath one arm. "You were right about something," Viola said. Marcus looked tired already. "That narrows it down helpfully." A few nearby villagers laughed quietly. Viola continued. "Mercy is not weakness." Marcus glanced toward the fields where water now moved slowly between fresh repair channels. "No," he said softly. "Usually it's just expensive." Viola nodded once. Then, after a long silence, she asked the question that had followed her since the first day. "Why did you stay?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. The pump was broken. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "There he goes again." Viola almost smiled. That cannot possibly be the whole answer. Marcus watched the villagers for a moment before speaking. "When people are drowning," he said quietly, "leaving starts to feel heavier than staying." Nobody answered immediately, because some truths arrived too simply to argue with. Viola gave a slow nod. "I will carry that with me." Marcus looked at her calmly. "That's the point." The caravan finally departed beneath the pale morning sun. This time the storage wagons carried evidence instead of stolen grain. And behind them, Murren Hollow remained damaged, tired, and scarred by hunger. But alive. The seed house still stood. The pump breathed again. And children no longer waited beside empty cooking pots pretending boiling water was soup. Weeks later, the first green shoots appeared across the western field. No speeches were given. No statues were built. Marcus would have hated both anyway. Instead, Elder Ida filled a small clay bowl with the season's first harvested grain and handed it to Nomi. Nomi carried it carefully across the field toward Marcus. He immediately became suspicious. "No." "Yes," Nomi answered proudly. "Children first. You told us the strongest people help carry the first burden." Marcus narrowed his eyes slightly. "I am beginning to regret teaching lessons." Sarah crossed her arms nearby. Too late. The whole village waited quietly while Nomi held out the bowl. Finally Marcus sighed. Then accepted it. This time nobody had to force him. The wind moved gently through the growing fields while Murren Hollow stood together beneath the morning light. Not rescued into weakness. Not saved by miracles. Simply given the chance to stand again. And far beyond the village, inside offices that once trusted numbers more than faces, officials across the Western systems slowly began learning a difficult human lesson. Sometimes mercy is not the enemy of order. Sometimes mercy is the only reason order deserves to survive. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Stories like this remind us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like someone quietly staying behind when leaving would be easier. Sometimes kindness is not soft. Sometimes it is the strength to carry the first burden until others are able to stand again. If this story moved you, consider liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel for more emotional science fiction stories about humanity, sacrifice, and hope. Thank you for listening. And take care of yourself until the next story.